All right, hi. So yeah, I'm Tori. And yes, my mum's cooking isn't bad. She's just a big fan of like chicken that she describes as melting in your mouth, which is awful. Um, and yeah, I painted the walls of my childhood home with vomit multiple times as a child. And there are still dishes that my mum refuses to cook because of my actions as a child. So yeah, this is me. Got a degree from Dunedin. This all looks quite pathetic compared to the qualifications of the first two speakers you've heard. But then my boyfriend got his degree, and I thought, be less educated than my boyfriend in this climate? Absolutely not. Went back and got my Bachelor of Science with honours. And here we are now. Yeah, so I work at ESR, I work in the Public Health Lab. I'll call it the PHL the whole way through. I'll abbreviate a whole bunch of stuff. So if anything is unclear, do let me know. Right, so I'm going to take you through some of the things that you can do if you are like, it's so boring not being sick all the time in New Zealand. So your option one is that you could go and buy a house in Havelock North. So specifically, talk to your real estate agent, this is your area. You want to be right in this red area. So as a lot of you will know, in 2016, New Zealand's largest waterborne disease, since it's been recorded, happened in Havelock North. Now, what we can see here is that there is 1 and 2 here. These are wells of untreated water that fed this area, but also some of these areas up here. Now, the bacteria that we're talking about here is Campylobacter, which I'll call Campy throughout. And so basically, all of these blue dots here, these are cases that were linked to this outbreak. So they were able to sequence bacteria isolated from the feces of all of these poor sick people and then link it to what was found in the actual water supply, so these yellow dots here. And these were all linked. So you can see it's quite far-reaching. 8,320 people were infected, 58 were hospitalised, and 4 ended up dying. So microbial death-wise, good option for you. All of these red dots here, these are all just people that just happen to get sick at the same time. They're not linked. Now, this is a really interesting case because as you can see around these untreated bores, were all these sheep paddocks. So there was particularly heavy rainfall that happened, and this washed all of the feces from these sheep into that untreated water, contaminated it, and then it went all throughout the area in Havelock North. So what actually is Campy? He's a bit of a dick. So it's this spiral-shaped bacteria here. This burrows through your gut mucosa, causing illness. Now 84% of New Zealand's Campylobacter is actually found in poultry. So if you are vegan, good for you. And if you are following that protein diet that was suggested, be careful with your chicken. And if you were my mum, really should have been careful with chicken, but here we are. Now this is some statistics around this. So Campylobacter is the most common cause of gastroenteritis in the world, but New Zealand is no exception to this. So even if you thought, Havelock North expensive, don't want to do that, being in New Zealand will get you a long way. So as you can see, compared to our next most commonly notified one here, we're looking a lot more. Now, for a while there, we were known as the Campylobacter capital of the world. And I think New Zealand sat down as a collective and said, is that really how we want to be known? Now, I was born in 99. So these were the years that my mum was really going hard with the chicken. And as we can see here, in 2006 through 2008, it was decided, there probably should be something done about this. Now, the way New Zealand consumes chicken, we don't just have more Campy, it's not a matter of that. It's just we eat a lot of fresh poultry. So you've got more risk of bacteria in that. So there was a whole bunch of interventions done on this pipeline from processor to plate that was done, and a whole bunch of things were brought in here, and it was fantastic. So what we can see here is that there was a 50% reduction in the number of Campy cases in New Zealand, which is amazing, really, really good. What you can't see, because this graph stops here, is this just keeps going straight. It doesn't come down any further, it's just plateaued since. So while this was amazing, there is still a lot of work to be done about bringing this level down even further in New Zealand. So ESR is doing some work on this. So we do a whole bunch of stuff, but one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at Campylobacter in water. So at the moment in the PHL, we're working on a project with the Ministry for Environment, and our work was published in a recent report, Our Freshwater 2023. And we're working with 9 councils that span right from the very top of the North Island down to the very south of the South Island, including multiple sites here in Christchurch, looking at the health of the freshwater. And we're not just looking for Campi, but we do look at Campi in quite a significant way, not just seeing is it present in our freshwater, but also in what levels. So there's some really interesting findings. So around 45% of New Zealand's total river length was not suitable for activities like swimming. Now, New Zealand has a lot of fresh water, so that's a significant amount of water we're talking about there. And that's because the Campi infection risk was greater than 3%. So when you go swimming, you don't normally think, I'm going to shit myself after this. But in about 45% of New Zealand's total river length, you had a 3% chance of that actually being your reality. So for coli here, so there's kind of 2 that we look at mainly, jejuni and coli. 37% of river monitoring signs were improving. Love that, that's great. But 41% were worsening. So that's not so good. And also this, bringing back to the Havelock North case here, dung from sheep and cows can contain Campi. That can then get contaminated, contaminate storm runoff, but also just the surface waters. Now in Christchurch we have a lot of wonderful aquifers, and so this obviously is not something we want as it can infiltrate into the groundwater. So this is something that we really want to keep an eye on as well. So yeah. So if you're like, I don't want to move house, Havelock North is expensive, Christchurch is not, you could just fly up and just go out for a meal in Wellington. So in 2023, some cases presented. I think 2 were hospitalised and one went to their doctor with salmonella. And they had gone out and they had eaten tahini-based products at a Wellington restaurant. And yes, so salmonella causes 93 million cases of illness globally a year and 150,000 deaths. So, you know, again, if you want your illness, good numbers here. So yeah, so this is also a gut bacteria. It is also something that you can find very commonly in chicken. It's transmitted in water sometimes, but chicken's a good way to go, mainly foodborne. And in particular, what we were looking at in the public health lab was it being found in sesame-based products coming from Syria. So unfortunately, the thing about a lot of the products that salmonella was found in, salmonella loves fat. So the sesame seeds and the roasting process unfortunately didn't get rid of all the salmonella. It was then put into products like tahini, like hummus, and like halva. And after that, it was pretty much impossible to get rid of because the fat layer in those products protected it. So New Zealand is the latest country to be affected by quite a big outbreak that spans at least 5 European countries so far. And so what happened was these patients, their feces, again, isolated bacteria from those up at Kenepuru, and then we in the public health lab got a bunch of products that had Syrian sesame seeds in it, and we were able to isolate salmonella. Now, in and of itself, you shouldn't have salmonella in your product, so that's a big no already. But we were also able to, it was genetically sequenced, and it was found that it was the same strain that was present in the guts of the patients. Now that's really important because we can say, yeah, this actually is your causative agent. This did actually make you sick, which is really important for recalling things, for any like legal implications that come out of it and all that sort of stuff. That happens there. Now, most interestingly about this was the strain that we isolated from the tahini and the halva products. It was the first time that this strain had actually been found in New Zealand. So that, I mean, interesting, but I guess not so good. But a lot of you would have actually seen the impact of us finding this because there was that massive hummus recall that happened quite recently. There were no cases actually linked to the hummus, which is good, but it's still important that we do these sort of recalls. And even since all of these news articles came out, we've received more batches of tahini with products from Jordan, and we have isolated more salmonella from them. So it's still an ongoing issue that's happening there. So option 3, you could go on a diet. So if you're like, I don't want to move, don't want to go to Wellington, my New Year's resolutions have kind of fallen off a bit. I want to get sick. I want a microbial illness. And I want to lose weight. You could do this. Specifically, swap out your fatty cheese for this high protein, low sugar panini cheese here. Now, you probably would have seen that some of the news articles around this as well. But yeah, so there was again more patients presented with Listeria monocytogenes, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a second, after eating panini cheese. So this is often recommended to diabetics because it's a really wonderful product because it's very low in sugar. So this guy is pretty awful. So this is Listeria. Yeah. So this is really, really important if you like dairy. It's really important if you like your deli meats because that's where it likes. Almost everything on the list of foods that you can't eat when you're pregnant, because of him. So yeah, it's because he likes to live in those. And this is a particularly important bacteria if you are pregnant because it can cause general food poisoning symptoms in people, but it also can cause miscarriage in pregnant people. So this is really significant in that way there. The other interesting thing about this guy is that symptoms for the other two I've talked about, Campion salmonella, 24, 48 hours and you'll know you've done it. But we sometimes see cases here that present like 30 to 72 days after exposure to this. Now, this can mean that this is missed in a lot of things because I think if I asked you, like, if you got sick, and I said, like, what did you eat? You'd normally blame the last thing you ate or potentially the thing that you think is the most dangerous. So we get a lot of curries through the PHL. A lot of people blame curry, even when they ate it like 4 hours before they got sick, gets blamed a hell of a lot of the time. And KFC, for some unknown reason, people really think KFC has got them. But yeah, it can be quite difficult to pick this up because, if I asked you what did you eat a month ago, you're probably not going to have a good answer for me, unless you ate curry, and then you're probably still going to blame that. So this is what happened with the panini cheese. So there was quite an unsatisfactory factory inspection that came as a result of them going to this factory, which raised some red flags. So we received a bunch of this product. And this little blue guy here with the zone around it, this sort of area around it, that's Listeria. So we found this in the panini. And interestingly, this was just purchased off like supermarket shelves. So this, I think, is a really, really great option if you're looking for a nice bit of illness that's quite easy to get. Just go to the supermarket, pack and save right in. But no, thankfully there was a recall after we found this product because we did find mono, which is the one that's really significant. But we also found that there was another strain of Listeria that's quite commonly found in the environment all through this product. And that's a really important indicator that there were hygiene and sanitation issues there as well, because that really shouldn't be in a product, let alone a product that was literally on Pack and Save shelves. And every time we went to Pack and Save after this recall happened, I pointed out the gap to my boyfriend. I was like, I did that. So yeah, my work, means something. So option 4, if you're like, it's too much, I need to get smarter, you could go and get some more NCA credits. So level 1, 2, 3, doesn't really matter. Specifically, enroll in Kaitaia College, sign up for their school lunches. So a lot of you would have seen these articles. I followed this like a hawk because this is my idea of hell. This just turns my stomach. So this is less interesting from a microbiological standpoint and just more interesting from an abject horror kind of place. But students at Kaitaia College were served raw chicken in their lunches. Now, there's something called it's like a pre-golden breadcrumb that these were coated in, and unfortunately someone in the catering team picked up a tray, put it in the cooked pile, and it just got distributed out. Here. So there's kind of no question. We once through the PHL did have a product come in and they asked us to see, do we think it's raw? We didn't get that question for this. They said we know it's raw. But you can see from the outside, it does look nice and golden. You wouldn't necessarily say raw. Now, this was particularly interesting. The rumor has it the one kid ate 4. I think we all went to school with that kid. We all went to school with someone that would eat 4. Um, but this was, so quite quickly, the students worked out that this was not how it should look. And they went to their principal and they said, like, the chicken's raw. And the principal came over the loudspeaker and said, stop eating the chicken, basically. And this triggered waves of vomiting throughout the students. And they had to be triaged into classrooms based on the severity of the symptoms. Don't you wish I talked about sex like the other two speakers now and not not vomiting? So this was awful. Now, we got this into the lab. We kind of had an idea that we probably weren't looking at some sort of microbiological factor here, because the sort of fastest you're looking at is 4 to 6 hours with like staph or bacillus. And these students were vomiting immediately. So we kind of knew that this was probably just, I've got a mouthful of raw chicken, or I've just eaten 4 raw chicken tenders, in the case of one student, more than anything else. But we did test it for a range of things. As I said before, 84% of New Zealand's campi is in chicken. So tested it for that, for salmonella, for E. coli, and a couple of other things. It was actually remarkably clean chicken. Had a bit of E. coli, but nothing you really wouldn't expect from raw chicken. And so if you read some of these news articles, they fired the caterer and they just said like there was no risk to the students. So I think the students would argue a little bit about the psychological risk. But one student was hospitalised, but nothing was isolated from his feces. So in the end, I guess just new caterer for them. But always worth a shot. Now, your last option, and like this is a much more serious note to sort of end it on, you could become a climate change denier. Now, as I mentioned before, in the Havelock North outbreak, there was significant rainfall before we saw this outbreak. Now, we're all in New Zealand. You might have heard that there's been like once in a lifetime flooding about 6 times this year. I'm not that old, and I've lived through a lot of once in a lifetime events. We know with climate change we're going to see more of those extreme weather events. We're going to see more rain, and campi loves rain. So it's because all of that, the feces, all of that surface level bacteria just gets washed into the waterways. So it's really, really important. And campi isn't the only bacteria that we're going to see an increase of due to climate change. Salmonella. Now, this was an American study, so who knows what temperature this actually is. Hot. But what we're looking at here is that as the temperature increases, so does the amount of salmonella. So with every 1 degree increase in temperature, there's about a 15% increase in the number of salmonella cases. So really, really strong relationship here. And unfortunately, the hotter it is, the more salmonella there is. We're just going to see this more and more. So really, like, the things that you want to do is you just want to be, doing your individual bit to reduce climate change. But just be thinking about the bigger picture, because unfortunately, it is going to increase the amount of sickness that we do have, the way we get sick. And I'm really just scratching the surface with the 2 that I talked about in this presentation. Mosquitoes, malaria, all of those things, love this, even with the spiders. It getting hotter is not something that we want. We really if the big takeaway message that you can take away from all of this is, climate change is bad. So we're doing a whole bunch of stuff to try and actually reduce your risk of getting ill, even though I've just told you about all the ways that you could get sick. All of the food cases that I've talked about, they've been recalled, so unfortunately, you'll have to look for something a little bit new. There's a whole bunch of stuff that ESR is doing. But if I can leave you with some key advice as a scientist, I'd say check your tahini batches, cook your chicken really well, and just stay away from the North Island. I don't know if you noticed, a lot of that was in the North Island. Don't get on that ferry. So that's me. Any questions?
With the chlorine in Christchurch's water, is that to help with this, and will we ever get rid of it?
So I mean, the chlorine, I believe, in Christchurch came in after the earthquakes. A whole bunch of things in the water. Bacteria is definitely one of those. But Havelock North, those untreated bores, they're now treated. So it's pretty bad practice not to have treated water now. So I wouldn't say like there's other options than chlorine, but I wouldn't say that it's something that we're going to see going away really. Yeah, there is some really interesting work being done around like there are certain cultural things around treating water. So a lot of marae don't have treated water, but that puts you at more risk of illness. But in general, there is a lot of movement towards treating water where we can, especially big public supplies. So yeah.
So with all these pathogens, large populations that stick around for quite a while, possible variation between generations of this. Have you noticed any patterns amongst behavior or adaptives to humans, etc. over time?
In general, the biggest pattern that we see with any of these bacteria is you're probably going to be okay unless you're immunocompromised. In the case of Listeria, if you're pregnant, it's a really big issue. If you're older or if you're very young, that tends to be the cases that we see there. So that pattern pretty much holds true in general. There is obviously you could say that there's been some increases in some of these things seasonally, which is another trend we pick up. That's not necessarily like you're more likely to get sick, at a certain time of the year, but we do see that there is more bacteria seasonally, but we're not seeing like more people dying of Campi in general or anything like that. So the pathogenicity stayed pretty much the same, which is, cool. Yep.
I hope this isn't a silly question, but if you're being sent some raw chicken from Kaitaia to test in the lab in Christchurch,
Yeah.
and it gets to the lab in Christchurch and you test it, you find all these awful things, how do you know that those have occurred in transit between Kaitaia and Christchurch, or that they were actually there at the time that the sample was picked up in Kaitaia?
Yeah. So in the Kaitaia case, we didn't actually find any bacteria, which is a good sign. Well, except for some E. coli, but it's a pretty good sign. But yeah, no, there are some really strict standards around that. Less to do with what I do, but smart people make the standards. So for things like a lot of waters, they have to come in under 10 degrees because we know that it's you're not going to see a lot of bacterial growth at that level. So for all the water, I get a bunch of water samples from those 9 councils from all over the country every week, and I temperature check them, and they need to be under 10 degrees for them to come in. Otherwise, it doesn't mean that it immediately removes the result, but it lowers the confidence in the result. So temperature checking is really important. So the Kaitaia based products, they came out of the freezer and they were chili packed and all of that. So they come chilled, and all of our stuff gets medically shipped over, urgently shipped overnight to try and reduce that. And we do have some cases of stuff like when the Cyclone Gabrielle happened where stuff did get delayed, and some of that we ended up getting the people to resample it to make sure. So it's mainly time and temperature that we sort of control for. There is obviously a risk that something could grow more, but I would ask what's in the chili bin that's contaminating the product. We a lot of it's we made sure that they use gloves to pick up the chicken out of the freezer. There's sampling procedures around that. And we try pretty hard not to contaminate things once it actually gets into the lab. Whole bunch of controls for that, but yeah. 3 of my bosses are here tonight, so I'm just trying not to make eye contact and making sure that I don't say anything that I'm not allowed to say, or gets me fired after this. But yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
If you got to avoid one, which one would you avoid?
Oh, Campy, absolutely. Oh, awful times. I'm pretty sure that that's the one that my mum gave me. She's gonna watch this on YouTube, and she's gonna show my dad, and she's gonna call me. She's gonna be so upset with me. But yeah, no. So Campy. I hate vomit. The idea of vomiting and shitting, and the fever, and all of that. That would be my pick. And I think as well, there's just something that I'm aware of being in New Zealand that it's always nearby. That's kind of I love my job, but it just makes me aware, and aware of things that I wish I wasn't aware of, I went swimming in Auckland over Christmas, and I was like, there's bugs in this water. My mum's like, isn't this lovely? I was like, no. So, there we go. Cool. Yeah.
Any comment on rainwater collected from your roof, like bird poop?
Well,
Other things like dead rats that collect in your rainwater tank that actually prevent you for a year.
Yeah, well, we actually, when I was younger, we moved into a house and we all got sick, and my dad, because we moved from a city area to this rural area, and my dad did check the tank and there was a rat. in it, so lived that experience. But one of my bosses is from the UK, and he says it's a shock to him that we have the rainwater thing there. So yeah, no, it is interesting. I mean, you're taking on your own risk if you sort of do that. There is like water testing that can be done to make sure your water levels are okay. I guess peak in there as well for rats. But yeah, no, it is definitely something that people can get sick from. When we do receive waters from illness, it generally is people that have rainwater tanks that feed the area that it comes from. So yeah, I mean, you can do it, but you know, just make sure you're doing the appropriate check-in as well at the same time. Yeah.
So the testing you do at ESR, is that mostly reactive, or do you also do monitoring testing?
Yeah, both definitely. So, I mean, I can't really represent ESR because like I work in one team at ESR. It's a huge range of stuff, but yeah, no, we do both. So the Panea was and the Salmonella. These are reactive ones. These are outbreaks and us testing as well. But there's just general like some commercial sites that we do. I know I'm not allowed to say what they are, but some general commercial ones that we do that they just send in regular testing to make sure everything's good. Yeah, so that's done as well. And there's also a lot of project work that we do. So we do work on the freshwater health. That's not reacting to anything, that's just sort of checking, monitoring, seeing what our freshwater looks like, and antimicrobial resistance as well. We do projects around that, just seeing sort of what are the levels in New Zealand and what are the trends coming out of that. Yeah. Thank you.